In the 47th year of the Fourth Age, when peace had long settled upon the lands of Gondor and Rohan, a shadow stirred in the forgotten corners of Middle-earth. King Elisar sat upon the throne of Gondor, his brow furrowed as he read the dispatch brought by a travel-worn ranger from the northern reaches. "My lord," spoke Beregond, captain of the guard, "the messenger speaks of strange tidings from the ruins near the Misty Mountains. The folk of Bree whisper of lights dancing where no lights should be, and the dead walking in places long abandoned." Aragorn set down the parchment, his gray eyes distant with memory. "Darkharrow," he murmured. "I had hoped that name would remain buried with the Second Age." In the great library of Minas Tirith, 3 companions gathered at the king's behest. Gimli, son of Glóin, now lord of the glittering caves, stroked his silver-streaked beard as he studied ancient maps. Legolas, prince of the woodland realm, stood silent by the window, his keen eyes watching the stars. Between them sat Gandalf the White, his staff gleaming softly in the candlelight. The ruins of Darkharrow were raised in the days when Gil-galad yet ruled in Lindon. Gandalf spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of ages. It was a fortress of the Númenórean, built to guard against the shadow of Mordor. But in the last days of the Second Age, something went amiss. The garrison vanished in a single night, and none who entered those halls ever returned. Gimli grunted, hefting his axe. "Sounds like our kind of trouble, if you ask me." "Indeed," said Aragorn, entering the chamber, "which is why I would ask this of you, my friends. The rangers speak of dark creatures gathering, and the Palantir shows me visions I cannot interpret. Will you ride once more to face the unknown?" Legolas turned from the window, starlight gleaming in his eyes. The trees whisper of an ancient hunger stirring. "I will come." "And I," declared Gimli, "though I'll not be happy about another adventure at my age." Gandalf nodded slowly. "Then it is decided. We ride at dawn for Darkharrow, though I fear what we may find in those accursed ruins." The company departed Minas Tirith as the first rays of dawn touched the White Tower. With them rode 6 rangers of the north, grim men who knew the wild paths and hidden dangers of Middle-earth. Their leader, Halbarad's nephew Hirgon, had seen 30 winters and bore the weathered look of one who had faced many perils. For 7 days they traveled northward, following the old road that wound between the White Mountains and the Misty Mountains. The weather held fair, but as they drew closer to their destination, a change came upon the land. The grass grew pale and thin, and the very air seemed to thicken with an unnatural weight. On the 8th day, they came upon the village of Tharbad, rebuilt since the War of the Ring, but still bearing the scars of ancient conflict. The innkeeper, a stout man named Barlaman Greenhill, welcomed them with nervous hospitality. "Dark times have come again to these parts, my lords," he said, wringing his hands. "Strange lights in the ruins and stranger sounds. My own nephew swore he saw figures walking the old battlement, though the place has been empty these long years." That night, as the company rested in the inn, Gandalf spoke privately with Aragorn. "There is more to this than mere restless spirits," the wizard said. "I sense a purpose behind these stirrings, an intelligence that guides whatever force has awakened." "The Palantir showed me visions of the ruins as they once were," Aragorn replied, "but also something else, a great chamber beneath the fortress, and within it, something that should not be." Meanwhile, Legolas stood watch upon the inn's roof, his elven sight piercing the darkness. In the distance, where the ruins of Darkharrow lay hidden by rolling hills, he saw a faint glow rising and falling like the breath of some sleeping giant. Something was indeed stirring in that place of old sorrow. As dawn broke gray and cheerless, the company prepared to leave the safety of Tharbad behind. Before them lay 2 days' hard riding to reach the ruins, and none could say what they would find when they arrived. The ruins of Darkharrow rose from a broad hill like broken teeth against the gray sky. Once proud towers stood shattered and overgrown with thorny vines, their stones blackened as if by fire. A great wall, still partially intact, surrounded the fortress, and beyond it lay the remnants of what had once been a mighty stronghold of Númenor. "Melon," whispered Legolas to Gimli as they approached, "do you feel it?" The very stones reek of despair. The dwarf nodded grimly, his hand tight upon his axe haft. Aye, and something else beside. There's been dwarf work here, long ago. I can smell the old forges. Gandalf raised his staff, and its light revealed ancient runes carved into the gatepost. Here is written the doom of Darkharrow, he read. In the depths we delved too deep, and found that which should remain hidden. May the valor forgive us our folly. As they passed through the broken gates, the air grew colder, and shadows seemed to move independently of their sources. The rangers drew their swords, their eyes scanning the ruined buildings for signs of danger. It came without warning, a shriek that pierced the air like a blade through silk. From the shadows of a collapsed tower came running figures, but these were not the restless dead. They were orcs, but orcs such as none had seen since the darkest days of the war. Their flesh was pale as bone, their eyes burned with cold fire, and about them clung wisps of shadow like living smoke. "Shadow orcs!" cried Gandalf, his staff blazing with white light. "They have been touched by powers beyond the grave." The battle was swift but fierce. Legolas's arrows flew true, each one blazing with elven light as it found its mark. Gimli's axe sang as it cleaved through the corrupted flesh of their enemies. The rangers fought with the skill of their forebears, but these were no ordinary foes. One of the creatures broke through their line and lunged at Aragorn with claws extended. The king's sword, Anduril, flashed in the gray light, and the orc fell, but not before its claws raked across his shoulder, leaving wounds that smoldered with unnatural cold. When the last of the creatures lay still, Gandalf knelt beside the king and examined his wounds. "The touch of the Shadow Realm," he murmured. "We must find shelter and healing, or this poison will spread." Hirgon pointed to a partially intact building near the center of the ruin. "There, my lord, the old keep still stands. We might find safety within." As they made their way through the rubble-strewn courtyard, none noticed the pale eyes watching them from the darkness beneath the earth. Within the keep of Darkharrow, ancient stones still held the warmth of forgotten fires. Gandalf tended to Aragorn's wound, while Legolas and Gimli explored the upper chambers, finding them empty but for dust and the scurrying of rats. "The corruption runs deeper than I feared," Gandalf said, his hands glowing with healing light as he worked. "This is not mere shadow sickness, but something far older. The wounds will heal, but slowly." Hirgon approached with a discovery. "My lord Gandalf, we have found stairs leading down. They appear to descend far beneath the fortress, into chambers carved from the living rock." The wizard's eyes darkened. "Show me." The stairs were indeed ancient, carved by skillful hands in the early days of the fortress. Down they went, far deeper than any foundation should reach, lit by an eerie phosphorescence that clung to the walls like frost. "This delving is older than the fortress above," Gandalf observed, "older perhaps than the coming of the Númenóreans to Middle-earth." At the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a vast chamber, its roof lost in shadows above. Great pillars supported the weight of the mountain, and between them stood statues of figures in ancient armor, their faces hidden by helms of unfamiliar design. But it was not the statues that drew their attention, but what lay beyond them. In the center of the chamber stood a pool of black water, perfectly still and reflecting no light. Around its edges were carved symbols that hurt to look upon, and the very air above the pool shimmered with malevolent energy. "A seeing pool," breathed Gandalf, "but not of Númenórean make. This is older, much older, from the days when the Eldar first walked Middle-earth, and older powers held sway." Legolas stepped closer to the pool, then quickly retreated. Something moves within the depths, something vast and aware. As if summoned by his words, the black water began to ripple, and shapes began to form in its depths. Not reflections, but visions of the past. The construction of the fortress above, the arrival of the Númenórean garrison, and then their discovery of this very chamber. "They sought to use it," Gandalf whispered, understanding dawning in his eyes. "The captain of the fortress, Isildur's kinsman Valandur, sought to use the pool to spy upon the movements of the enemy, but the pool showed him more than he bargained for." The visions in the water grew darker, showing the gradual corruption of the garrison as they gazed too long into the pool's depths, their transformation into something neither living nor dead, and their final descent into madness and shadow. And now came a voice from the darkness beyond the pillars. New fools have come to disturb our rest. From the shadows between the ancient pillars stepped a figure that had once been a man of Numenor. Tall he stood, garbed in armor that gleamed with a cold, pale light, but his face was a mask of sorrow and rage. His eyes burned with the same cold fire as the shadow orcs, and about him clung wisps of darkness like a tattered cloak. I am Valander, captain of Darkharrow, guardian of the northern marches. The spectre spoke, his voice echoing strangely in the vast chamber. Though death has claimed me, my duty remains. None shall pass who would disturb the sleep of the deep waters. Gandalf stepped forward, his staff bright with white light. Your duty ended long ago, Valander. The kingdom you served has passed into legend, and the darkness you sought to watch has been defeated. The ghostly captain laughed, a sound like wind through broken stone. Has it indeed, Grey Wanderer? Then why do the old powers stir? Why do the deep places whisper of awakening? You know nothing of what lies beneath these waters. Aragorn, despite his wound, moved to stand beside Gandalf. I am Elisar, king of Gondor, heir to Isildur. By the blood of Numenor, I command you to stand aside. Valandur's burning gaze fixed upon him, and for a moment, something like recognition flickered in those terrible eyes. Isildur's heir, yes, I see the bloodline in you, but you too are a fool, as was your ancestor. Do you think kinship grants you wisdom? Do you think your crown gives you power over the ancient deep? The black pool began to churn, and from its depths rose shapes that had no place in the world of the living. Creatures of shadow and malice, beings that had dwelt in darkness since before the first sunrise, they emerged dripping with the essence of the void itself. Behold the watchers in the deep, cried Valander, raising his spectral sword. They have waited long for release, feeding on the despair of this place, growing strong on the sorrow of ages. Through the pool and through the pool they will emerge to reclaim the world that was once theirs. Gimli hefted his axe and spat. Well then, we'll just have to send them back where they came from. But Legolas, his keen eyes studying the pool and its guardians, saw something others had missed. Wait, he said urgently. Look closer at the captain. See how the shadows that surround him writhe and twist? He is not their master. He is their prisoner. Gandalf's eyes widened with understanding. Of course, the pool does not grant power. It enslaved. Valander and his men were not corrupted by choice, but captured by the very forces they sought to watch. The revelation came too late. The Watchers in the deep had fully emerged from their prison of black water, and their malevolent presence filled the chamber with a cold that went beyond the physical. Ancient they were, and hungry, and they had been waiting far too long for their freedom. The battle that followed was unlike any the companions had fought before. The Watchers in the deep were not creatures of flesh and bone, but beings of pure malice given form. They moved like living shadows, their touch bringing a cold that froze not the body, but the very soul. Anduril blazed with starlight as Aragorn fought, but each stroke seemed to pass through the creatures as if through mist. Legolas's arrows flew true, but found no purchase in the ethereal forms. Even Gimli's enchanted axe, forged in the halls of Erebor, could barely wound them. It was Gandalf who recognized the truth of their nature. They are bound to this place by ancient will, he cried, his staff spinning in great arcs of white fire. We cannot defeat them by force of arms alone. Meanwhile, Valander stood motionless, his spectral form wavering as if caught between two worlds. The shadows that bound him writhed more violently, and in his burning eyes, a desperate battle raged between his will and the alien intelligence that held him captive. The pool! Legolas called out, dancing away from the grasping tendrils of a Watcher. The pool is the source of their power. Gandalf turned his attention to the black waters, and what he saw there filled him with both horror and hope. In the depths, he could perceive the true nature of the ancient binding. not just a prison for the Watcher, but a gateway between realms that had been forced open by the desperate need of Númenórean sorcerers. They sought to create a window into the realm of shadows, he realized, but instead, they broke down the barriers that kept such powers at bay. The revelation came with a cost. One of the Watchers, sensing the wizard's understanding, turned its full attention upon him. Cold beyond imagining washed over Gandalf, and for a moment, his light flickered and dimmed. It was then that Valander acted. With a cry that shook the ancient stones, he raised his sword not against the living, but against the very shadows that bound him. The spectral blade blazed with the remnant of his nobility, and where it struck, the tendrils of darkness recoiled. "My king," he cried to Aragorn, his voice now carrying the nobility of ancient days. "The pool must be sealed, but the price will be great. One must take my place as guardian, to hold the barrier between worlds until the Valar themselves see fit to mend what was broken." Aragorn understood immediately. The curse of Darkharrow was not mere malice, but a burden of guardianship that had fallen to Valander and his men. They had become unwilling sentinels, holding back forces that would otherwise spill into Middle-earth and bring about a second darkness. Before he could respond, the largest of the Watchers turned its attention to the king, sensing in him the bloodline that had first opened this cursed gate. With a sound like the screaming of winter winds, it lunged forward, its form expanding to encompass half the chamber. As the greatest of the Watchers bore down upon them, Gandalf made a decision that would echo through the ages. Raising his staff high, he spoke words of power in the ancient tongue of Valinor, words that had not been heard in Middle-earth since the Elder Days. "Elbereth Gilthoniel," he cried, and the light of his staff became as bright as starfire. But this was not an attack, it was a call, reaching across the barriers between worlds to touch the minds of the wise. In Lothlorien, Galadriel raised her head from contemplation of her mirror, her eyes widening as she heard the call. In the Grey Haven, Círdan the shipwright felt the summons and turned his ancient gaze eastward. In Rivendell, Elrond set aside his writing and prepared for a journey he had hoped never to make again. The light of Gandalf's staff held the Watchers at bay, but the wizard's strength was finite, and the creatures of shadow were eternal. Sweat beaded on his brow as he maintained the barrier of light, knowing that help was coming, but wondering if it would arrive in time. "My friends," he said through gritted teeth, "I can hold them, but not for long. The seal on the pool must be renewed, but it requires a sacrifice of will and soul that I cannot make while maintaining our defenses." Aragorn stepped forward, Andúril still gleaming in his hand. "Then I shall make it. The blood of Númenor opened this gateway. Let it close it as well." "No!" cried Valander, his spectral form flickering with desperate urgency. "You do not understand the nature of the binding. It requires not death, but eternal watch. Whoever takes this burden will become as I am, neither living nor dead, bound to this place until the ending of the world." But even as they spoke, the situation grew more dire. The pool's waters had begun to overflow its ancient bounds, and where the black liquid touched the stone floor, new shadows began to rise. The gateway was widening, and soon it would be beyond any power to close. It was then that Legolas spoke, his voice carrying the wisdom of his people. "There is another way." In the ancient days, when Morgoth's power was at its height, the Eldar sometimes chose to bind themselves to places of power, becoming part of the land itself to hold back the darkness. But such bonds can be shared. The burden divided among willing hearts. Gimli grunted understanding. "A fellowship, then, as we were before, but bound by more than friendship." The wisdom of the elf's words rang true, but before they could act upon it, the sound of hoofbeats echoed down the ancient stairs. Into the chamber rode the reinforcements Gandalf had summoned, Elrond and Galadriel themselves, their power shining like gentle starlight in the cursed depths. "The White Council convenes once more," said Elrond, dismounting with fluid grace, "though I had hoped our work was finished." Galadriel approached the black pool, her ring of power gleaming on her finger. "This corruption runs deep," she observed. It touches the very foundations of the world, but it can be contained if the price is willingly paid. With the arrival of the White Council's surviving members, the chamber filled with a light that had not shone there since its creation. Yet even their combined power could only hold the Watchers at bay, not destroy them or send them back to their realm. The damage done here is ancient and profound, Galadriel explained, as her light wove patterns of protection around the company. When the Númenóreans first sought to use this pool for scrying, they unknowingly weakened the barriers between our world and the void itself. The Watchers are but the first to break through. If this gate widens further, worse things by far will follow. Elrond studied the ancient runes around the pool's edge, his vast knowledge of the Elder Days serving him well. These are not Númenórean symbol, nor even of the First Age of Middle-earth. They date to the music of creation itself, placed here by the Valar as guardians against the discord that Morgoth sowed in the very foundations of the world. Gandalf, still maintaining his barrier of light but visibly straining, spoke urgently. Then we face not merely escaped prisoners, but a fundamental breach in the structure of reality itself. This cannot be healed by any power we possess, only contained. Valandor's spectral form flickered with understanding and despair. Yes, for 3,000 years, my men and I have held this watch, bound by our failure to guard what should never have been disturbed. We are the lock on a door that must never be opened, and our vigil must be eternal. But not yours alone, said Aragorn firmly. The Fellowship stood against the darkness once before. If the burden must be shared, then we shall share it willingly. One by one, his companions nodded their agreement. Legolas drew his white knife and pricked his finger, letting a single drop of elven blood fall into the black water. Where it touched, the surface calmed, and the writhing shadows beneath grew still. By the grace of Elbereth, I bind myself to this watch. Gimli followed suit, his axe blade drawing forth a bead of dwarven blood, and I, by the strength of stone and flame. Gandalf allowed his barrier to flicker for just a moment, as he too offered his commitment. By the power of the flame, imperishable, that burns within me. But as Aragorn prepared to make his own binding, Elrond raised a hand to stop him. Hold, King of Gondor. Your fate lies not here, but in the world above. Your people have need of their king, and this watch requires guardians who can exist between life and death. Galadriel nodded agreement. The binding must be made, but not by those whose destinies are needed elsewhere. There is another way, one that requires great sacrifice, but does not doom the living to an eternity of vigilance. She approached the pool and began to sing in the ancient tongue, her voice weaving patterns of power that had not been heard since the trees of Valinor shed their light upon the world. The black water began to recede, drawn back by forces older than memory. "What are you doing?" Gandalf asked, though understanding was already dawning in his eyes. "What should have been done long ago," she replied. "I am calling upon the straight road that leads from Middle-earth to the Undying Land. If this gateway cannot be closed, then let it be redirected to a place where such powers belong." As Galadriel's song reached its crescendo, the very air in the chamber began to shimmer and change. The black pool, which had been a window into the void, now reflected something entirely different. Glimpses of distant shores where the light of the two trees still lingered in memory. The Watchers in the deep, sensing the change, fought against the new current with desperate fury. Their forms became more solid, more terrible, as they expended their accumulated power in a final attempt to maintain their hold on Middle-earth. "They resist," cried Elrond, adding his own voice to Galadriel's song. "The straight road calls to them, but they have been too long in darkness. They have forgotten the music of their creation." It was then that an unexpected voice joined the ancient melody. Valandor, the ghostly captain, began to sing words that none had heard him speak, not the common tongue of his mortal life, nor even the high speech of Númenor, but the pure language of the Ainur themselves. "How do you know that song?" Gandalf asked in amazement, his barrier of light now unnecessary, as the Watchers were drawn inexorably toward the changing pool. Valandur's form had begun to shine with a light that was not spectral fire, but true illumination. "I remember now," he said wonderingly, "before my birth in Middle-earth, before my life as a man of Numenor, I was among the Maiar who sang at the creation of the world. I was sent to aid in the building of this fortress, but I chose to take mortal form to better serve among men. In that choice, I forgot my true nature, until now." The revelation transformed everything. The captain was not merely a ghost bound by duty, but a Maya who had willingly limited himself to mortal form and memory. His long vigil in the depths had slowly awakened his true nature, and now, with the straight road opening before him, he remembered his purpose. "I was placed here, not by chance, but by design," he continued, his voice now carrying harmonic that resonated through stone and spirit alike. "This pool was meant to be sealed by one who understood both the music of creation and the hearts of mortal being. But I had to learn that understanding through long years of service and sacrifice." The Watchers, caught now in the current of the straight road, began to change as they were drawn toward their proper place in the order of creation. Their forms of shadow and malice dissolved, revealing the broken remnants of Maiar, who had been corrupted by their long imprisonment in the void. They too were servants of the music once, Galadriel observed, her song guiding their transformation. Twisted by Morgoth's discord and cast into the outer darkness, they forgot their names and purpose. But the straight road leads not only to the undying lands, it leads to redemption for those willing to remember who they were meant to be. One by one, the former Watchers allowed themselves to be drawn into the pool, their corrupted forms melting away like ice in spring sunlight. Where darkness had been, now there was only the gentle light of distant shores calling them home. But the greatest transformation was yet to come. As the last of the corrupted Maiar vanished into the pool, now serving as a gateway to the undying lands, Valandr stood at its edge, his spectral form flickering between the appearance of a Númenórean captain and something far more ancient and luminous. "The way is open," he said, his voice carrying both sorrow and joy. "The breach is healed. The Watchers return to their proper place in the music. But the gateway itself must still be guarded, lest others in their pride attempt to reopen what wisdom has sealed." Gandalf stepped forward, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You mean to stay, don't you? To maintain the watch, even though your true nature has been revealed?" The Maya who had once been Captain Valandr nodded slowly. "It was my task from the beginning, though I did not remember it. The Valar knew that this place would be built, knew that mortal pride would lead to the breaking of ancient seal. They sent me to be ready when that day came. But surely, now that your true nature is revealed, you can return to Valinor," said Elrond. "Your long service has more than fulfilled any obligation." Valandur's form solidified, taking on an appearance that blended his mortal guise with hints of his Maiaric nature. Tall and noble, with eyes that held starlight, and a face marked by both wisdom and compassion, earned through long years of suffering. "I could return," he acknowledged. "The straight road is open to me as well. But I have learned something in my years of mortal flesh and spectral watching that I never knew in the Blessed Realm. I have learned to love Middle-earth and its peoples as they deserve to be loved, not from the distant perfection of Valinor, but from having walked among them, fought beside them, and yes, failed with them." He turned to face the company, and his smile was radiant with understanding. "Don't you see? This was never about punishment or duty alone. It was about choice, the choice to remain and serve, not because I must, but because I wish to. The same choice each of you has made in your own times of trial." Aragorn bowed deeply, recognizing in Valandr a nobility that transcended even kingship. "Then you shall not stand watch alone. Though we cannot share your burden of guardianship, we can ensure that your sacrifice is remembered and honored. And more than that," added Galadriel, "the pool need not remain a place of shadow and sorrow. With the straight road opened through it, it can become something far greater, a place of healing and hope. where the light of Valinor touches Middle-earth once more. Legolas, ever attuned to the subtleties of growing things, noticed it first. "Look," he said softly, pointing to the edges of the chamber, where before there had been only cold stone and creeping shadow. Now tiny flowers began to bloom, Elenor and Nifredil, the flowers of Lothlorien, growing in soil that had known only darkness for 3,000 years. The transformation was spreading. The black water of the pool was clearing, becoming as transparent as crystal, and in its depths could be seen not the horrors of the void, but the gentle shores of Eldamar gleaming in eternal twilight. "A new wonder has come to Middle-earth," breathed Gandalf, "a place where the wisdom of the undying lands may be sought by those with pure hearts and desperate need." But even as joy filled their hearts, Valander raised a hand of warning. "Let this gift not become a temptation," he cautioned. "The pool may now show truth instead of corruption, but the desire to look beyond the bounds of one's own fate has brought ruin before. I will guard not only against intruders from without, but against the pride of those within Middle-earth who would use even this blessed site unwisely." In the days that followed, as news of the events at Darkharrow spread throughout Middle-earth, the ruins themselves underwent a remarkable transformation. The broken towers began to rebuild themselves, not through any craft of hammer and chisel, but through the same power that had opened the straight road through the pool. The stones that had been blackened by ancient fire now gleamed like marble in moonlight. Gardens sprang up where once only thorns had grown, and the waters of a clear stream began to flow from a spring that had been dry for millennia. The fortress of Darkharrow was becoming something new, not a military stronghold, but a sanctuary. King Elisar established a new order of guardians to serve alongside Valander, men and women of proven wisdom and pure heart, who would help tend the sanctuary and guide those who sought its wisdom. Among them were rangers of the north, knights of Gondor, and even some of the Dunedain who had served in the wild places. "Let this be a place of pilgrimage," Aragorn decreed, "where those who have lost hope may find it renewed, and where the wisdom of ages past may illuminate the troubles of the present. But let none come here with hearts full of ambition or desire for power, for such will find only mirrors of their own folly." Gimli, ever practical, oversaw the construction of proper roads and way stations for pilgrims, while Legolas worked with the growing garden, teaching the new guardians which plants were sacred to the Eldar, and how they might be cultivated in this blessed soil. But it was Gandalf who established the most important tradition of the new sanctuary. Each year, on the anniversary of the pool's transformation, he would come to lead a ceremony of remembrance, not only for Valandur's sacrifice, but for all who had given their lives to keep the darkness at bay. "Let it be remembered," he would say, "that the greatest victories are often won not by the sword, but by the choice to serve others, even at great cost to oneself." Valandur chose to remain when he could have departed, and in that choice lies a lesson for all who would call themselves guardians of the free peoples. The pool itself became known as the Mirror of Truth, for unlike Galadriel's mirror in Lothlorien, which showed possible futures and distant events, this pool reflected the deepest nature of those who gazed into it. Many who came expecting to see visions of power or knowledge, instead found themselves confronting their own hearts, their fears, their hopes, and the choices that had shaped their lives. Some left troubled by what they had seen, but others found peace in finally understanding themselves. The pool judged no one, but it hid nothing, and in its honest reflection, many found the courage to become better than they had been. As the months passed, pilgrims came from all corners of Middle-earth. Elves traveled from the woodland realm and the Grey Haven. Dwarves made the long journey from Erebor and the Iron Hill. Men came from Gondor and Rohan, from Dale and Esgaroth, and even from the distant lands of Harad and Rhûn, drawn by tales of a place where ancient grievances could be healed. Yet for all the wonder and healing that the sanctuary brought, there were some who viewed its existence with suspicion or fear. In the deep places of the world, where neither sun nor moon had ever shone, ancient powers stirred with fury at the transformation of Darkharrow. The establishment of a gateway to the undying lands within Middle-earth was seen as a grave threat by those who had hoped that the departure of the ring-bearers would leave the world defenseless against the return of Shadow. Chief among these was Thuringwethil, the vampire messenger of Sauron, who had escaped the fall of Angband and hidden in the deepest caverns beneath the Misty Mountain. For ages she had slept, feeding on the darkness and growing strong, waiting for an opportunity to reclaim the world for her fallen master. The light shining from Darkharrow was like a physical pain to her corrupted form, and she began to gather the remnants of darkness that still lingered in the forgotten places of Middle-earth. She was not alone in her hatred. From the ruins of Dol Guldur came whispers of malice, and from the depths of Moria echoed the drumbeats of creatures that had learned to hide from the light. Slowly, carefully, she began to weave a web of corruption, seeking to turn the very pilgrims who came to Darkharrow into agents of Shadow. Her plan was cunning beyond measure. Rather than attack the sanctuary directly, she would corrupt it from within, using the mirror of truth itself as a weapon. For if one gazed into the pool with a heart already touched by Shadow, what they saw might drive them to despair rather than enlighten. The first sign of her influence came in the form of Berion, a young knight of Gondor who had come to the sanctuary seeking guidance after losing his family in a border skirmish with corsairs from Umbar. When he looked into the mirror of truth, instead of seeing hope or understanding, he saw only visions of revenge and violence. "They must pay," he whispered, his eyes reflecting the cold light of the pool. "All of them must pay for what they have done." Valander, ever watchful, sensed the corruption immediately. But this was unlike the crude malice of orcs or the ancient hunger of the Watchers. This was subtle, working through the victim's own pain and anger, twisting natural grief into something darker. "Leave this place," the Maya commanded, his form blazing with protective light. "You have been touched by Shadow, and until it is cleansed from you, the sanctuary offers no peace." But Berion was beyond hearing. Drawing his sword, he attacked not Valander, but the other pilgrims in the chamber, his blade seeking the throats of innocents who had come seeking only wisdom and healing. The battle was brief but terrible. Valander was forced to bind the corrupted knight with chains of starlight, but the damage was done. Word spread quickly that the sanctuary had been defiled, that its protection was not absolute. Worse yet, other pilgrims began to report similar experience. A dwarf from the Lonely Mountain became obsessed with reclaiming gold that had been lost to dragonfire. An elf maiden from Mirkwood fell into despair over the fading of her people. One by one, those who came with wounded hearts found their pain magnified rather than healed. Gandalf arrived within days of the first incident, his face grim with understanding. "Thuringwethil," he said simply, "I had hoped she perished with her master, but it seems some shadows are too deep to die." "How do we fight her?" asked Hirgon, now captain of the Sanctuary Guard. "She does not attack directly, but works through the very thing we seek to protect." Valander stood by the pool, his starlight dimmed with sorrow. "She has found the one weakness in our defenses," he admitted. "The mirror shows truth, but truth can be as destructive as any lie when the heart is not prepared to receive it. We cannot simply bar entry to those in pain. They are the ones who need healing most." It was then that Galadriel arrived, her own mirror wrapped in silver cloth. "There is a way," she said, "but it requires a sacrifice that even you may find difficult, my friend." She turned to Valander with eyes full of ancient sorrow. "The corruption comes not from the pool itself, but from the pain that pilgrims bring to it. To cleanse that pain, someone must take it upon themselves, not to destroy it, but to transform it through their own suffering." Understanding dawned in the Maya's eye. "You speak of the path that Eru himself walked when he sang the discord of Melkor into the greater music, to take the shadow into oneself and transform it through willing sacrifice. But the risk," Gandalf protested. "If you fail, if the corruption proves too strong, you could be lost as surely as any mortal." Valander smiled, and in that smile was all the courage that had sustained him through 3,000 years of lonely watching. "Then it is a risk I must take. For what is the purpose of my vigil, if not to stand between the light and those who would corrupt it? As the sun set on what would prove to be the final day of Thuringwethil's influence, Valandur prepared for a battle unlike any he had fought before. Not against external enemies, but against the accumulated pain and shadow of all who had sought healing and found only deeper wounds. Standing at the edge of the mirror of truth, he opened his heart to every sorrow, every rage, every despair that the vampire's influence had magnified. The agony was beyond description. The grief of Barian for his slain family, the dwarf's avarice grown monstrous, the elf maiden's despair, the fading of all beauty. But with each shadow he absorbed, Valandur sang a note of the original music, weaving the discord back into harmony through the power of willing love. His form began to change, becoming less solid, more radiant, as if he were transforming into living starlight. In her deep cavern, Thuringwethil felt her web of corruption unraveling as each strand was transformed from shadow into light. With a shriek of rage, she abandoned subtlety and launched herself toward Darkharrow, her bat-like form blotting out the stars as she flew. But she arrived too late. As she descended upon the sanctuary, she found not a place of corruption and despair, but a fortress of pure light, guarded by a being who had become something more than Maya, a living embodiment of redemptive love. The vampire's form dissolved at the first touch of that radiance, not destroyed but purified, transformed back into the Maya she had been before Morgoth's corruption. For a moment, she remembered her true name, her original purpose in the music of creation. Then, with a cry that was equal parts grief and joy, she flew not toward darkness, but toward the straight road that led home to the undying land. As dawn broke over Darkharrow, the sanctuary stood transformed once more. The mirror of truth now reflected not merely what was, but what could be, showing each visitor not only their wounds, the path to healing them. Valandur, though changed by his sacrifice, remained as guardian and guide, his love now so great that no shadow could find purchase in his light. And in the years that followed, Darkharrow became known throughout Middle-earth as the haven of second chances, where any who had lost their way could find the road home again. For in taking upon himself the pain of others, Valandur had learned the greatest truth of all, that love freely given has the power to transform even the deepest darkness into light. Thus ended the tale of the Ruins of Darkharrow, not in victory over enemies, but in the triumph of healing over hurt, of hope over despair, and of love over all the shadows that would divide the children of Eru from one another and from their true home in the music of creation. Here ends the Chronicle of Darkharrow, as recorded in the Red Book of Westmarch and preserved in the libraries of Minas Tirith, that future generations might remember that the greatest battles are often fought not with sword and shield, but with open hearts willing to bear the burdens of others.